I'm here really today to talk about advancements in audiology and kind of review a lot of common questions that we get in audiology. When we talk about advancements in audiology, we always start here with the inner ear. The inner ear controls all of our hearing and balance, and it's one of the tiniest, smallest structures in our skull, directly behind the eyes, and there's 20,000 hair cells. So these little black cilia that we're seeing in this picture represents the hair cells in the inner ear. There's 20,000 of them when we're born, okay? But a lot of different things can cause them to get damaged or to die off over time. Things like loud noise exposure, ototoxic medications, so cancer therapy, chemotherapy, cancer drugs can cause hair cell damage, for instance. And also just the natural aging process. Unfortunately, like vision, we all start to lose cochlear hair cells starting at about age 40. And 0.5% a year is average for cochlear hair cell loss. It just happens so gradually and so slowly over time that many of us aren't aware of the extent of damage until we have it tested. But really, all the advancements start there with stem cells and thinking of how could we recreate hair cells in the inner ear. Dr. Anu Sharma has a great laboratory, a research laboratory up at University of Colorado Boulder. Her brain and behavior laboratory is doing some fascinating work with EEG imaging of the brain. And she's found that when hair cells die in the inner ear, the brain cells that once carried that sound input to the auditory parts of the brain also die. So that's not a great thing to have happen, unfortunately, right? And so this really matters to us in our field because cortical reorganization or brain rewiring that happens with the hair cell loss is detrimental to a lot of cognitive functions overall. And so we know when one sense is depleted, another sense typically fills in, right? So I'm sure you've all heard of that. If you cannot see well, you might hear better. Or if you don't hear well, you may be relying more on vision to help fill in those gaps in your hearing. But really, she's found that amplification can reverse the brain rewiring if treated early enough and correctly with the right type of stimulation or the frequency-specific correction that is needed to reverse that damage. So she has a great lab. It's Sharma, her last name, sharmalab.net. So if you're ever interested in finding out some of the research that's going on right here locally in Boulder, they also encourage people to come visit their lab up in Boulder if anyone ever had the inkling to want to go see what they're doing in person. But really, that's interesting, right, to think about the brain and rewiring. But what people really want to know is where are we in finding a cure? We estimate somewhere around 46 million Americans suffer from hearing loss, and the World Health Organization reports more than 1.5 billion, yes, I said billion, people, or 20% of the global population are living with hearing loss around the world. So there's a lot of need for us to find a cure. Currently, we only have hearing instruments and cochlear implants to treat hearing loss, so many researchers are looking at stem cells as promising a biological way to treat the damaged hair cells in the inner ear. Reversing hearing loss is even more important today, now that we are convinced and have research to back the fact that untreated hearing loss can contribute to cognitive decline, such as found in Alzheimer's and dementia. And this is coming from the CDC. What are the top things that we can do to minimize the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia? One of the last ones there is hearing loss. So we want to keep our brains healthy. We want to do everything in our power to not, right, have cognitive decline. So that's why many big organizations are looking at how are we going to find a cure to hearing loss. One of those is Harvard, the Harvard Stem Cell Institute. They are investigating ways to use stem cells, specifically stem cell-derived auditory neurons, they've transported those into deaf animals and have seen hearing improve. The problem is that every species of animal has a different inner ear structure. So we have 2.5 coils to our inner ear, but mice and other types of animals that we're using in research only have, for instance, 1.5 coils. So unfortunately, transferring this information from animal studies to human trials is a big challenge. But someday, this type of research could allow us to really get stem cells derived from the individuals so that it would reduce the risk of immune rejection, or the immune system rejecting the foreign cells. So the final step really is trying to find a safe way to surgically transplant those stem cells into the inner ear. Again, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about directly behind the eyes. It's very complex and delicate, but there's a lot of money going into this. You can see just how complicated it is from this graphic. So in the middle there is a picture of the inner ear. So the human inner ear has 2.5 coils, and then those semicircular canals, I don't know if I can point with this, but in the middle there, that controls the balance system. So again, very delicate, very small, probably about the size of a pea in its actual size, the inner ear. So very hard to get to. The inner ear is the hardest bone in your body. The cochlea, the outer shell, is you can't even penetrate it with an MRI. So very, very hard area to research. But you can see from this, a lot of factors are being considered for substances and substrates. The biggest challenge not only is getting the cells where we need them to be, but also this last part in the middle here, cell proliferation. With stem cells, if you don't know the right type of cell you want to use or that you need to grow, you could unfortunately do something like create a brain tumor, which no one's going to want a brain tumor to fix their hearing loss, right? So it's definitely complex, but we're definitely getting closer and closer with each study out there. A recent report, 2021, on stem cell-based therapies for hearing loss stated that there's still unknown factors in the inner ear implementation of neural stem cells, such as tumorigenicity, which I just mentioned, and immune rejection. So right now, we're not quite there yet. Most people are saying give it 10 to 15 years. So I would hope it would be faster sooner than that, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with research. Stanford is also looking into this. So the Stanford Initiative to Cure Hearing Loss identifies the fundamental mechanisms by which the inner ear functions and uses this information to develop novel approaches towards preventing damage, repairing, and one day replacing damaged inner ear tissue. So, big names, right? Harvard, Stanford, talk about MIT in a minute. But I think what's also important for us to realize is that we know the 6 causes of hearing loss, that we've known that for a very long time, but what keeps developing, what our knowledge keeps expanding on, is really the consequences of hearing loss. So more and more research is showing that untreated hearing loss can lead to a lot of negative side effects that we want to avoid, right? Some of which we wouldn't necessarily attribute to hearing loss, like loss of income, depression, cognitive decline, things of that nature. But I do like Stanford's statement here that hearing loss is caused by a variety of chronic and acute traumas, as well as congenital pathologies and medication toxicity. Everyone's going to have hearing loss, in other words, at some point in their life. It's just depends on if you have genetic, perhaps predisposition to having hearing loss earlier in life, or some other illness, accident, or injury, perhaps of the structures of the inner ear. So important to remember those things, I think, when we're looking at research. Another advancement is a company called Frequency Therapeutics. Frequency Therapeutics was started by 3 or 4 Harvard, MIT professors, really with the goal of trying to find a new kind of regenerative therapy, again, based on stem cells or descendants of stem cells. So they were trying to recreate the tiny little hair cells, those 20,000 I began this talk about, So Frequency Therapeutics, in an article last year, the title of the article was this MIT spin-out Frequency Therapeutics drug stimulates the growth of hair cells in the inner ear. So you can see on this image on the right, the pink line, that's the stem cells in the animal study. So with their drug, they were able to regenerate stem cells, or regenerate the hair cells in the cochlea compared to the control group on the left side, where you do not see that full pink circle in the 1.5 coils. I think this was a mouse. So they were really excited. It was very promising. A lot of people were investing in this company, Frequency Therapeutics. They were on NASDAQ. So a lot of people were very excited, but unfortunately, just about 2 weeks ago, they came back and said their human clinical trial failed. And so unfortunately, this happens in research. We get excited, we're seeing promise, and then we go to human trials and it fails. But we did learn a lot along the way. We have to remember that and think positively and hope that eventually this will happen in human trials. But now Frequency Therapeutics is going to take the remainder of their resources and put it towards MS and thinking about remyelination for MS patients. So for now, we do have great hearing technology to assist with hearing loss and tinnitus, and we have great manufacturers that have been around a long time that are continuously improving their hearing technology. These are the major brands out there today that are really doing great research on hearing technology. Oticon now has a deep neural network on their chip, which anyone in computer science knows about deep neural networks, so that's pretty cool that they can incorporate that into a hearing device. Starkey actually is just coming out with their new device with a deep neural network as well, and why that matters is it's just making the hearing device smarter, and it's almost like artificial intelligence in a hearing device to try to predict your needs in complex environments like background noise, which is the #1 complaint with hearing loss is I can't hear in groups like this luncheon. It was pretty hard to hear each other sitting and trying to converse, right? Widex is a great name. Pure Sound is their latest and greatest. Resound is a great name. They're getting a lot of benefit with some of their technology in signal to noise ratio improvements. Phonak, that picture on the bottom, that's a 24/7 hearing aid that stays in the ear for up to 3 months at a time. It's amazing technology. So we keep seeing advancements, which is good, right? We all want to be able to maximize effectiveness with what we do have available right now, because doing nothing is not great. Also, some interesting research is out there in tinnitus. So tinnitus, or ringing in the ears, is something that we specialize in at my clinics, and very interesting research at University of California, San Francisco, looking at where in the brain is tinnitus coming from and how could we rewire the brain. Possibly in this method, it's using deep brain stimulation. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little white disc on the top there. It's implanted and it's connected down to this deep brain stimulator, but that is meant to target the neural networks in the brain that are misfiring, that are hyperactive, and that's what we're hearing as the tinnitus, is this hyperactivity in the brain due to typically lack of input, because what we're seeing on that computer screen is a high frequency hearing loss. Dr. Chung at UCSF is hoping that he can translate these findings into a less invasive treatment. Most tinnitus patients don't want to have brain surgery, but to implant something like this, but to know that it could work in thinking about ways to make that less invasive is in our future, so that's exciting. And then there's another emerging company in tinnitus called Neuromod. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but Neuromod is developing a product called Lenire, and that, yes, it's a tongue stimulator. But the point of it is we know bimodal stimulation for many different nerve-related problems can create rewiring in the brain. So bimodal just means 2 senses, so stimulating both hearing through the use of headphones and through a tongue stimulator that has 32 electrodes on the tongue. What they're showing in clinical trials is that you could get reduction in tinnitus through this bimodal stimulation using the Lenire product. The problem is they're a company out of Ireland, so all their studies were in Ireland and Germany. And so FDA here is making them redo trials before they can release the product in the US. So we're kind of waiting to see if the FDA will approve the device for use here in the US. It looks a little funny, but the nice thing is you only have to wear it 15 minutes for 12 weeks, so you can do it at home. It's not like you walk around with this thing, but you could do it pretty easily and pretty quickly in 12 weeks. Their second clinical trial, they're calling it the TENT-A2 clinical trial, had 191 participants and very high levels of success here. So 95% of treatment participants did report an improvement in tinnitus, the severity of the tinnitus over the 12 weeks. And 91% of them experienced continued improvement even after 12 months. So they only had to use it for 12 weeks, and then they took their survey again at 12 months to make sure that the results were stable. 91% of them were, and close to 90%, 87.8%, said that they would recommend the treatment to others with tinnitus. So very positive results, and we're encouraged with these findings to hopefully be able to offer it to patients here in the US. But I have no idea timeline, because it takes the FDA a while to approve of things like this. So lots of exciting research in my mind out there trying to find cures for both hearing loss and tinnitus. But we definitely have options currently that can help people. We just launched a Sound Relief Learning Center online portal, so we're excited to be able to offer patients even more education and support through an online portal. So we developed 7 courses, 7 modules that they can, that our patients can log into and learn more about what's going on with their ears and their brain, so that they have immediate access to that information. So we're excited to see what the future holds and to see if someday we'll be able to offer, you know, the magic pill that everybody wants to reverse the symptoms, reverse both hearing and tinnitus. So questions? Sure, in the back.
2 questions.
Yeah.
When somebody is born deaf, what's gone on?
That's a great question. When someone is born deaf, it could be a number of things. It could be if the mother was exposed to ototoxic medication herself, because that could cause damage to the inner ear. But honestly, we're seeing the #1 cause of hearing loss in newborns to be a genetic mutation, and we don't know why, but it's genetic, yeah.
Second question, could you explain how a cochlear implant works, please?
Sure. A cochlear implant is an electrode arrangement. So the best electrode arrangement, I think, is now up to 26 electrodes. So 26 electrodes are inserted into that cochlea, the 2.5 coils, the first picture I had up there. So the surgeon, the ENT surgeon, inserts the electrodes into the inner ear. They stimulate the nerve directly through that electrode. So once you have the electrodes inserted into the inner ear, you no longer would be able to hear through air conduction, through normal hearing. You're only going to be able to hear through the electrical stimulation directly to the nerve. So it takes some time, like physical therapy, to teach the brain how to use that input to decode speech clearly. But it's fascinating and very effective when we've really kind of gone through all options with hearing technology, and the patient cannot benefit, usually because of total nerve loss, or pretty significant nerve loss at least. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim.
Of the 6 reasons for going deaf, do they all affect the hair cell, or is that where the loss comes from, or are there other things that happen?
Great question. So Jim's asking, are there other reasons other than the 6, like the Stanford depiction showed us? Yes, there are other reasons, because you could have middle ear damage. So the sound wave has to go from the eardrum through the middle ear bones to the inner ear, then from the inner ear up the auditory nerve to the brain. So there's a lot of steps along the way that could be damaged, but the most common cause is damage to those inner ear hair cells for those 6 reasons. But some people do have a genetic disposition for middle ear disease, so they could have something called otosclerosis, where you get calcium deposits on the bones in the middle ear, and that causes a hearing loss. So you could have a perforated eardrum, and that would cause a temporary hearing loss until the eardrum was either surgically fixed or healed on its own. So there are some things that are outside of those 6 reasons, but the number one cause, honestly, is noise exposure. We all live in this very loud, noisy world, so you can't get away from loud noise exposure, and that's the number one cause of hearing loss. And then I think genetics would probably be number 2. So.
One more question.
Yeah.
Me?
And
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a question. You know, all of our kids had ear infections when they were kids.
Yeah.
Little, just because of where we live. Is that, does that affect their hearing as adults?
No, but good question. Does ear infections in childhood affect hearing loss later in life? No. The answer is no. So that's the good news. Unless, I mean, the only time I've seen that is with untreated hearing loss in children. So in other countries where we don't see access to antibiotics, and we don't see early intervention for tubes and things of that nature to drain fluid from the middle ear, you can have permanent damage to those middle ear bones I was just talking about with you. And then that could lead to permanent hearing loss in adulthood. But in this country, you rarely see untreated hearing loss in children ending up in adult hearing loss.
My second question is, do you have any way to help people whose spouses don't listen to them?
Well, we have that conversation a lot. Spouses not listening. We talk about that a lot. There's a big difference, you're right, between hearing and listening. You might have great hearing, but you might not want to listen to your spouse, right? Yeah. One more.